Yeah, so just let her rip. However you want to go, that'll be fine.
Okay, cool. I think, let's see. So got it. So meeting is live right now. We are on YouTube being broadcasted in front of millions and millions of audience members tonight. Welcome. Happy July, everyone. Thank you for being here. Michelle is one of our featured guests. I think everyone knows Michelle. She was our co-principal of teaching and learning, a founding teacher before that at our school. She's now directing special projects of all kinds at our school. One of those special projects being our renewal. And so I think with that, we're going to talk about renewal quite a bit tonight. And so Michelle is one of our experts in-house. Chris is here too tonight to kind of share as we see fit. So I think what we're going to do is just for the sake of time, we're going to skip over the mission moment tonight. And I'm going to start right in with current headlines, just to give you a sense and flavor of what we're up to right now as a school in the month of July, what we're thinking about, what kids are experiencing, et cetera. Let me share my screen. I'm going to go into this tonight. That's right. And so I think with current headlines, it's July. So it's a very unique point in the year in which we're officially closing out 21-22 and then moving into 22-23 quite fast. And so that's where we are. And so some headlines of where things are, both kids' experiences, some data we've got recently. We're not going to dive as much into this as we will in August, but let me give you a flavor for things. So I think first, just graduation. So we engaged in and enjoyed two festive graduation ceremonies, one at the middle school, one at the high school this past June. High school graduation, which is a key kind of measure for us as a school as we move into renewal, was 95% overall, which is beyond our 93 target and in line with what we've done in the past and significantly higher than what the state and city typically experience in a given year. So we should be proud of that. We support our kids through with this graduating class. 2 years of remote learning, essentially. I mean, they spent a lot of time just doing things that no one else has experienced before in school. So kudos to them and kudos to our high school team. And then they were standing on the shoulders of our middle school team. So really, really proud of that. Other things to be proud of, Summer Academy. We've got healthy numbers of students taking part in small group interventions at both sites. Ratios are great. Kids are getting lots of attention. Kids who need it most, kids who perhaps had attendance issues over the course of the year, didn't pick up on some things they should have. This gives them that opportunity. And so we've got about 25% of our kids overall taking part in that. If you recall, this is largely funded by an outside grant that we applied for back early in the spring. It's been helpful. The curriculum at the middle school has been fairly solid, and we've been able to expand our services as a result of this additional funding. So feel great about our kids being able to engage in some academic work over the course of July and through the beginning of August. With enrichment, also funded partially through this grant, we've got about 100 kids who will be taking part in various enrichment offerings over the course of the year. You can see those offerings listed: basketball camp, step practice, soccer, dance, ecology. Kids are climbing up all kinds of things: art in New York City, food blogging, baseball, and other sorts of endeavors. There's a lot going on and a lot that we should be proud of that kids are experiencing. And keeping them busy and exposed to new opportunities. Other things, just moving into test sort of areas, but first, Sal, what you got?
How do I see one of these food blogs?
Oh gosh. Well, I want you to send me a quick note after this meeting and I'm going to set you up.
All right, great.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Chris, do you know the answer to that?
I have not been.
I mean, are they meant to be shared? If they're just doing it for themselves,
yeah,
I don't want to.
I'm with you. We should all be engaging in this. So, and maybe you can take part, provide some commentary, some responses, some questions. That'd be awesome.
Learn from them.
Yep. So on the exam front, a number of things we're going to dive into more deeply in August, but headlines are middle school state exams in math and ELA, and those will be provided in mid-August as they are each year. So we look forward to seeing those. We did get some data in June on generally how kids did in comparison to the city on various standards. We don't have kind of how they did on a proficiency level yet, but based on that data, I feel pretty good about middle school math. I'm thinking I predict that we will outpace our district of location based on that data. I could be wrong, but it wouldn't surprise me if we do. ELA, the numbers aren't quite as high. They're in par with where we were in 2019. So we'll see if those June values hold and give us a good indication of where we end up in August. On the STAR front, we tested kids for a third time in the spring. Overall, again, we'll dive into this more deeply in August. The results were lower in the spring than they were in the winter. Now, one interpretation is that kids grew less or grew backward over the course of the spring, which we don't believe was the case. What we suspect here is just there were a number of tests that were competing for time and attention over the course of the spring, from state exams to roundtables. That's the middle school. At the high school, we had regents, we had AP exams, and that's where the focus was. So I think part of what we see here is just the demands being high and us prioritizing on some things that were real to kids, and this taking second fiddle. Not a good thing, not what we want if we want to get good data from this, but I think that's the reality as of now. I'll have more to report in the coming month. Any questions here before I move on to other headlines over the course of July? All right, let's do so. Regent exams, overall, the headline here seems to be that the results were lower for us as a school this spring in June than they were in 2019, the last time kids took the exam. This is somewhat understandable, albeit disappointing. The last 2 years have been really hard. And so I suspect that part of that hardship is reflected in relatively lower scores than where we were in 2019 with kids. We don't have data on how other schools, the city or state did at this time. We'll have a better sense of things relatively when we have that data. So if the entire city and state also struggled with this, then we're on par. If we uniquely struggled with this, we've got some big questions to answer as a team. So that's the latest with regents. Some kids are retaking regents in August who perhaps didn't pass in June. And so that's a part of what kids are experiencing in summer school, some prep for that. AP exams wise, my sense right now, I haven't looked at all of the data, which just came in recently. I received a report today in the mail. I think the results are mixed. Some really impressive scores in some courses and some scores where there's been perhaps some stagnance or even some backward movement. So more results to provide there in August. In terms of summer workflow and what we're focusing on right now, there are a number of things. Planning is a big part of what we do in the summer for the coming year, and some of that's about reflecting on the prior year to make good decisions moving forward. So we're doing that. We just got back this week with our SLTs, our school leadership teams at both sites, and so I'm looking forward to some development work, some training work with everyone else not in the building, being able to focus on that in the coming weeks. Updates to goals and targets, roles and responsibilities, some budgetary planning stuff in detail we're doing, curricular updates happening, and improvements to various curricular components based on some of the data we have now in-house. We're doing some refining of policy in our systems at the school, operationally cleaning up both buildings, refurbishing things, buying some new stuff that we need for the coming year, that kind of thing. And then there's some reporting going on, some annual reporting that Chris, Alex, and others are a part of. So that's the scene with regard to what's going on in July at our school. On the hiring front, something else which is also going on at our school, we've got approximately 8 vacancies right now that we are hiring for. You'll see them listed there. 8 seems like a lot. I guess there are other things that I think are competing for like what is on my mind and what's keeping me up at night. This is important, but I feel like we're doing a pretty good job with this. So there are a couple of vacancies here that are perhaps more tense than others is perhaps there's a dearth of applicants coming in and we've got to do some outreach to have that happen. But I expect us to perhaps make even 3 hires this week. So movement there happening. So with that, those are the headlines. Are there any questions about what we're doing in July based on what I've conveyed over the past 2 slides? Excellent. Let's move forward then. So we're going to talk about renewal. Michelle's going to help me out in a few areas here. What we're going to do is I'm going to tell you about where we are right now. We're going to talk about a few specific areas of our renewal application, mainly regarding revisions to our charter that we're going to be proposing that we'd like your take on. And then we'll talk about next steps and what's going on over the next 2.5-ish weeks as we complete the application and submit it. So that's the run of show here. And so there's a lot here. You saw this slide last month. So I want to take you through it. What's in red is just kind of like a status check. So we said last month, we said the deadline, just to kind of remind folks of where we are. We said the deadline for this application, which we provide every 5 years as a charter school, is August 16th. We're on track and feel good about where we are right now to have things in good form by that time. Michelle's managing workflow. We also have an external consultant, Simeon, in the mix, who's helping us out. We've known Simeon since 2010-ish almost. He helped us with our first application when we opened. So he knows our school pretty well, and we know him pretty well. We're devoting a lot of time to kind of building from our first renewal application. We were successful with that, so we're not changing things up, but we're making updates that reflect where the school is today. So that's been the process here. In terms of like heavier lifts, we've got a high school now that is fully scaled out. So that's a big change from where we were 5 years ago. So we've got to embed information on who we are and what we're doing as a high school, in addition to being a middle school. And then there's some material revisions that we're working through. A part of that has to do with a proposal to expand downward and what that means for our configuration as a school. So those are the 2 bigger, heavier lifts, in addition to some other moderate lifts. We had said last month that a full draft would be created by June 30th. We are there. We did that. Simeon has looked at that draft and provided comments on that. So right now we're responding to those comments. So we're in good form there. I'm going to talk about the exact schedule 2 or 3 slides down, so you'll have a sense of that. But right now we're on track. A couple of things that have come up. Let's see here. So I'm going to talk about where you guys plug in momentarily. Last month, I had said that we had an interim visit from our authorizer spring of 2021. We've yet to receive that report, which is a little frustrating for us because we like to respond to what's in there in terms of like input and feedback. And so I've received some of that feedback verbally by our liaison, but would like to see the written report just for formality. So we've been nudging pretty consistently there and are still working on that. More to say there soon. In terms of strengths as a school, graduation is it. So that's a headline. And then our demographics, that's a headline. So I think those are important things, perhaps 2 of the most important things that our authorizer looks at when looking at schools like ours that serve high school kids. So pleased with that. In terms of challenges, I said this last month, our middle school results are not bad, but they have been historically, at least back in 2019, slightly lower than our district and location. We've been able to explain some of that away with who we serve and how our population resides outside of that district and location. But that still is something that if we had scores that were significantly above our district level location, we wouldn't have to go into detail about the whys of this. So that's one challenge I'll put out there now. And then we just have that scores along. So that's there. We're still working on a 5-year budget that reflects what we're going to be doing over the next 5 years. There's some nuances there because of a plan to expand downward or a proposal to expand downward. I'll say more there momentarily. And yeah, that's kind of where things stand now versus where we were last month. Headline being, we're making good forward progress. Let me pause there for folks who were here last month and now are here now. Do you have any clarifying questions before we move into some of the specific issues we want to discuss tonight? Cool, we will do so then. So, a couple of things here. So as I said, Simeon looked over our first draft of our narrative in the application. The application consists of a narrative, which is the main portion of the application, along with a number of attachments that reinforce what's in the application. And then there's one component of that that includes any revisions the school would like to make as a part of the renewal. So 3 components. The narrative is the big part. Simeon dug into that. Here is comments. Headlines are pretty good. Let's polish this. Let's refine it. Let's organize it somewhat differently here and there. That's where I'm going to help you. And then what I recommend is there's some spots in which you could update your application further from the first renewal application to reflect your track record in various areas. Here's where you might do that. And then I might say a bit more about your remote learning program, because you went above and beyond what the traditional school did, and it's worked out. So those were his general headline results or feedback coming to us. Michelle, would you add anything there in terms of like feedback? So those are the things we're working on right now. And what I'd say again is that our strengths as a school, as we move into like this renewal application, as mentioned by David Frank, who runs our authorizing office, is benchmarks 1 and 2, one around strong performance results, graduation being one major component of that, and then benchmark 9, which centers on enrollment and who you serve, and ensuring that you serve a representative demographic of the community where you reside, which we also do. And so 2 strong checks there. I think with that, based on his feedback, where we are right now, how things went 5 years ago, what we're doing, we feel pretty good and comfortable about moving forward and putting forward a fairly strong narrative for renewal. Questions or comments there before digging into a couple of areas within the application that would benefit from some input here? Cool. So what I want to do, there are specifically, we're going to now move into from the narrative revisions, and want to just sort of give folks a heads up and allow for some input and recommendations on areas of revision that we're going to request within our application. There are 4 specifically. I'm going to have Michelle provide a bit of context for the first 3, and then I'll move into talk a bit about the 4th revision. So Michelle, I'll hand things off to you.
All right. Hey, everybody. It is good to see all your faces on Zoom, if not in person. So in terms of the revisions, there's what's called non-material, which are less significant, and material. So right now I'm talking about non-material revision requests. So they're updates to our materials with state, but they're not a huge impact on what we're doing. The first 3 are because state has updated their guidance. And so I believe that legislation has been passed. And so they now need to make sure that all charters have updated their guidance to comply with the new legislation. So we need to update our complaint policy to clearly state a couple of things about what happens if somebody has a complaint alleging that we violated the law or the charter, that they can skip talking to the principal basically and go directly to the board. So it's just formally updating that policy in our handbook and in this document. There's another update around our enrollment and admissions policy, where the policy has to clearly state relevant sections of the law that our lottery will comply with. Again, Chris runs our lottery in compliance with all the laws. This is just explicitly stating that we do so in this policy. And then the 3rd is around our student discipline policy, which is if a child is suspended out of school who has an IEP and there's an MDR or a manifestation determination review that finds that the student's behavior is a result of their disability, they need to return to school immediately without serving the rest of that suspension. We have already done that in instances where that has come up. So this is not a change in our policy. It's simply explicitly writing out in our policy that that is what we do. And so those are the 3 updates. For revisions, we do need it to be included in the board minutes, and we do need a formal resolution passed from the board as part of the materials that we give to state. So that's why I wanted to review these with you all, so that way you know what you're passing a resolution about. We do then also have a question about a non-material revision regarding our discipline policy and our student and family handbook. So we've done a couple of things, like, for example, change our rules from the 3 Bs to clause. And so the question that we have for our rep is like, is that level of revision one in which we need to formally apply for it? Or can we just say, hey, we changed our rules from the 3 Bs to clause. We still have expectations, we still have rules, but the wording is different. And so we're going to ask Paolo that this week and then just follow his guidance about whether or not that needs to be a formal revision or whether we can just update it without going through that formal process.
So to be clear, these 3 revisions, they're things that we do in practice already. It's just we're being told to make sure this is in our charter and in various materials within our school. So we're just making updates in accordance with that. Are there any clarifying questions, recommendations on these revision requests? Cool. So let's talk about the 4th revision. So the 4th revision within our application relates to our expansion downward proposal and its impact on max enrollment, which we would have to adjust as we now serve families in grades K through 5. So that's the proposal we want to put forth. We've had some discussions as a group around the benefits of that. What I want to do is, I think, we've been in different places with regard to being close to this based on a conversation last meeting. So I do want to revisit some of the motivations and benefits of this, as well as some of the challenges during the time we have this evening. And so in proposing this expansion, we would serve kids in kindergarten. Wow, how about that? Perhaps opening in the fall of 2023. We may, I would like to defer that 1 additional year to give us some time for planning. So that will be a part of what we discuss if given the ability to expand downward at some point in time, at the right point in time. So I'm going to talk a bit about, we're going to look at a table which shows the enrollment and its impact by this downward expansion momentarily. But as we serve more kids in elementary school, right now we would have to increase what our maximum enrollment is provided to us by the state in serving kids. So that's one change that would happen as a result of this, which is material. So in terms of motivations for this downward expansion, we've discussed these before, but it's worth underlining. My sense, my belief is that first and foremost, we'd be able to serve our students earlier in their education. And so this would mean that significantly more of our students in doing the work well would be at grade level academically as of 6th grade. Right now, about 1/3 of our kids come in at grade level as of 6th grade. Moreover, and as importantly, relationship-wise, collaboration-wise, we'd be able to work with our families for a longer period of time, from kindergarten through high school. And that matters in thinking about what kids experience and how they learn. In addition, we believe that in expanding downward, that would eliminate some of the competitive disadvantage that we face in not having an elementary school that then directly feeds into our middle school. And so I think with that, we would then be able to ultimately reallocate. We do devote a whole lot of energy and time and effort thinking about the work that Chris has on his plate each week to recruitment. In doing that, we feel as if we'd be able to reallocate some of our efforts and resources from recruitment to other areas of our school that directly impact student learning, their experiences in school, their academic success, et cetera. So these are all good things, and I think compelling motivations. Strength-wise, like what makes this sort of like something that we can do that we have strengths in, our family's support or interest here. Anecdotally, families have often asked, hey, why don't you open an elementary school? I have a great idea. Why don't you open an elementary school? I remember a couple of years ago, someone who had moved to Florida calling me up on the phone in the middle of the day saying, hey, I think you should open an elementary school in Florida. No way. But it felt good to hear that. Moreover, I think right now, from a community and leader perspective, politically, et cetera, I think we're kind of neutral. We're seen as a decent school that does families right. I think our political leaders see that too. We're not a school that kind of goes out there and starts, shaking things up and getting people frustrated or angry. And so I think with that, we've got the ability to win the backing or support of community leaders as we did when we first opened. We haven't spent as much time with that in recent years because we focused our attention on our school. In addition to that, our authorizer's given us the green light. So that's cool. They're saying, you guys, you should go for this. We're not going to get in your way. It's kind of an awkward time politically. We're not quite sure what's going on with regard to charters and appetite, but like, you should do it. And we've got some funding to do so, much more so than we had when we first opened. And that would certainly help our efforts in doing this smoothly. This isn't here, but we've done this work before. So in comparison to where we were back in 2012, we are much more skillful in doing this kind of work than we were back then. So those were our strengths. In terms of challenges, I think there's one, and this is coming from other people that have taken part in this kind of endeavor recently. It's just that the Board of Regents is reluctant right now to offer and grant expansions of schools. And so we've got to win them over. And so that requires some work and some effort. In thinking about that and in having conversations with other school leaders in Brooklyn, it has been recommended to me that we engage in the help of a lobbyist, public relations strategist, if you will, to support our efforts in addressing this challenge. I've been in communication with two thus far, and I've gotten one that I think would serve us well. So I'm going to say more about that a bit later during our executive session tonight, but there has been some work offline in setting things up so that like this could be successful. Let me pause there. I've said a lot. I want to make sure the team here tonight has wrapped their head around this. Are there any clarifying questions? Feel free to reiterate back what you think you heard. Happy to answer any questions you have.
Well, a question about, and maybe I'm a little behind, so excuse me, but the expansion grant, is that dependent upon whether or not we decide to expand, or this
correct,
is
and given permission to expand. So if given permission and if we go for it, the funding would be there.
Got it. And then, so related to the timeline, you said something about enrollment changes based on that?
Yeah,
is that some sort of
hold that
penalty,
question.
or
I'm going
like,
to get two slides down, and then I'm sorry. Go ahead. Say that again.
I'm just trying to understand. You said 23 versus 24, 2023 versus 2024. You have to have additional students or enrollment or whatever. Did I mishear you?
No, you didn't mishear me. I just said something confusing. So give me two slides, and I'll offer you something that I think will make it clearer for you.
But before you move off of this one, Josh, is the grant conditioned on approval this year, or does it roll over?
That's my understanding is that it does. Michelle, do you have a different interpretation?
Yeah, I emailed our representative from the grant to get some clarity around the timeline. We haven't heard back yet. So we'll hopefully have a better answer by the next meeting if they get back to us. The timeline for the grant as proposed is that the funding extends through June 30th, 2024. So my understanding of the grant as it's written is that as long as we're doing the planning work that we applied for by June 30th, 2024, we would be eligible for the funding. But we wanted to get clarification on that from the grant representative because we want to make sure that the funding lines up.
Yeah, it's
fall
kind of
of
a big
2024
deal.
opening. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a big moving part. So let's get absolute clarity on that. And then I guess the other issue is, is this, if we're doing this as part of the renewal, is there another time when we could or should do it? Is this the best time to package it up with the renewal? I don't know how this works, at the higher up level.
We could.
What's Paulo saying, or what are people advising us?
We
are they
could
saying
make
do
this,
it now, or
we could propose this downward expansion on an annual basis when there's a call for revisions. And in this case, because we're applying for renewal, the preference from our authorizers that if you're going to make revisions, do so within this application.
Get it all done at once. Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks.
But Jim, I think you raised a good question. There are two timing questions here. One is, if we weren't given permission by the Board of Regents this year, do we automatically lose that funding if we applied again next year to expand downward, and then perhaps we're granted that funding? That's the first question. The second question is, if we're granted permission this year to apply downward, and then we decide or think it's best to defer by a year, is that funding available to us in the following year?
Exactly. I think that's what you need to wrap your head around. Not that it would, I take it, look, if people are telling you now is the right time to ask the question, let's ask the question.
Yeah.
And then we can, once we get the answer to the question, we figure out what to do next. But the financial aspect is critical. So yeah, let's see if that, let's see how that falls out.
Yep.
Tom, what? Yeah.
I will
Okay.
just chime in that with the webinars from SED, they have been saying repeatedly that things should be bundled, that revisions and renewal should be bundled. They have a preference for doing everything at once, that they will not accept revision requests during the usual annual timeline in December, that it needs to be submitted in August. So we can submit it now, which seems like their preference, or would need to wait until December of next year.
2023.
Mhm.
Right.
All right. So actually, Sal, this may be helpful to you. So this provides a vision of what enrollment could look like at our school if granted permission to expand downward, and then taking that, and then what that would look like starting in the year 22-23. So that would be next fall, which again is ambitious in my mind. But like, if that's all that we have available, I would want to consider like the merits of that.
Right. The missing link, I think, for me is you said, I heard you say, if we don't do this and that, then we were going to lose this grant. So has there been something done already to have sort of, it's like ready to go? We just contingent upon us getting approval. So that has already been applied for, is what we're saying. That, okay, I get that part.
Yep.
And then the timing goes, it starts 23. That's why in 2024, it's not that it's more, it's just continuing on from year one. You just didn't start in year one.
Yep. So if we deferred, this year one would be 24-25, everything would slide over one if that's what we felt was best. The other question you raised a few moments ago was just, you asked about like the max enrollment stuff I was talking about. So just to be clear, and this gets to be tricky. Right now we have a max enrollment of 655. Originally as a school, it was 784. You can throw that information out. It's not really important, but it's interesting. So right now our max enrollment is 655. And if we were granted the ability to expand downward, we would then have to, and this is within our application, apply for an increase in our max enrollment, because if we offered elementary school to kids, we would have more than 655 kids within our charter, now K through 12. And so you'd see that existing even in year one, where we would have 690 kids in our first year of an elementary school. So that is one material revision we have to make to our charter or request this August. And as you slide down to the right on totals, you'll see the way in which our enrollment would increase over time.
Mm-hmm.
So 990 would be within the next 5 years, our max enrollment. And then what we'd have to do is, if you look down the line, the next renewal, we'd have to expand our max enrollment by one more class, because as you see here, even in 5 years, we're not fully scaled out. We wouldn't serve a 5th grade in that last year of this upcoming renewal term. What questions do you all have here as we think about, wow, this is pretty wild, almost 1,000 kids at Unity in the year 28, 29. That doesn't even seem like, first, that's a long way away, but like, this is the way things would unfold.
So Josh, this is Lenny. My question is, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, thank you. You lucked out tonight for the mission moment. I was going to have your speech recorded and played in front of an audience of thousands of people on YouTube tonight. What are you going to say about that?
I wish I had to say when I was playing Lotto. I wish I had to say it when I was playing Lotto. But that being said, what kind of plan do you have to scale up from a faculty perspective if we were to, upgrade or downward expand?
Ratio-wise, it'd be around the same. So we look at the number of students we serve and the number of classes. In the elementary school, it's almost a bit less complex, because kids interact with the same teacher over the course of the day with special teachers typically. And so we would have, for every 20 to 25 kids, a main teacher they have plus special teachers. And then over time, we'd scale up according to that rough ratio. And I think, you know, what charters tend to do now is they offer team taught classes in elementary school. So I imagine us doing the same thing as a best practice.
Great, thank you.
I think, you know, it's, I don't know the numbers, Josh, as well as you do, but my daughter, you know, she's pre-K, and it feels like it's much heavier in terms of the ratio. Maybe it's just the school she goes to in terms of the you know, the number of educators per kid at these lower levels. Is that not the case?
You know, I think we're, as a middle school and high school, maybe a bit unique in that I would suspect our ratios, teacher to student, are pretty high in comparison to our peer schools. Certainly at the high school, and I would say at the middle school too. And I'm thinking of even the elementary school where my son attends, where like he's in classes of 30-ish kids, and it's one teacher and a TA. So I think
Yeah,
it varies somewhat.
Yeah, that was my experience growing up. Was it was 20 to 30,
Yeah.
you know, per teacher in a classroom. But what I'm seeing, at least in, you know, Manhattan's crazy, but
Yeah.
it's much lower than the 20 to 30. I'm just wondering what the you know, what the standard is for this. I'm sure we'll figure it out. I'm not worried about it, but it does seem like it's a heavier. Maybe it's because I'm just thinking because my daughter, it's more of a I guess they fall into the daycare rules rather than the education rules. So there's probably a different, you know, sort of program going on there. But they do have far more teachers per pupil than the kind of the 1 to 30 or whatever that I grew up with.
Yeah, I think that's the trend. Michelle, would you add
Yeah.
anything here?
I don't have any particular insight, but I do think that the ratios are different for daycare and pre-K versus elementary school.
Yeah, that's probably right.
And the grant funding would allow us to bridge the gap between the gap year and the planning year. So that grant funding would allow us to do things like hire an incoming co-principal, potentially hire somebody to do student recruitment or curriculum work, which would allow us to be thoughtful about this planning before we open doors.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Other insights or questions here?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, this is gonna be a continuing conversation, but we've talked in the past about the difficulty of, you know, the market for these kids is tight. It sounds like, from what we've heard, you know, and let's say we do start in year 2, we got to get 150 kids, you know, I'm not saying we answer that now, but the question is, how are we going to get those kids, or do they exist? We have to take them from other schools, you know.
I think that's going to be, what you've done is you've hit on one of the reasons that the Board of Regents is reluctant to expand charters, because right now the headline is that there are fewer students overall in New York City, and the trend seems to be downward moving. So why would you expand offerings, which just makes things harder for the existing system? So I think that's real. And so we've got to make a compelling case for why we're special.
Right.
And, you know, I think from a competition standpoint, and I still like, I mean, we exist in this very real environment, and Chris does on the daily. And I still feel awkward talking about schools in such a manner. But it is real. And I would just, my view is that we opened up as a middle school. That's hard. It is hard to win over the hearts and minds and get the attention of families in 6th grade when there are so many other schools that have elementary schools feeding in the middle schools. And so I think from a competitive standpoint, we're pretty good at being competitive here. So I'm like, I think we would, you know, fortunately or unfortunately, like we would be successful. We went out. I believe that. Any other insights here as you kind of wrap your head around this? Okay, so let's see here. I'm going to move us forward. we're going to talk about next steps. And here's where I could use some input because you guys are all very busy people and we want to make the best use of your time. So in terms of next steps, during the executive session tonight, I want to talk about the merits of perhaps working with someone who can help us on the kind of like political end of things, given that's just the reality and the terrain that we're working within. In addition to that, and thinking about renewal. So there's like the revision stuff and expansion downward, and bucketing that here and putting it aside. And now let's move back to like the renewal application and some of the steps that we're going to be taking over the next 2.5 weeks to complete this and do so well enough. And so if you look at this small table here, you'll see at the top, Simeon to review and comment on draft 1.0, and that's of the narrative. He's done that work. Michelle, myself, Chris, Alex now have that in hand. We're making now edits to that draft and doing so over the course of the next few days. We're getting it back to him at some point in time. We're talking about things tonight to get some feedback from y'all. And so that's a part of the discussion today. From there, what we're going to be doing is sending Simeon our attachments and revisions. So what we talked about tonight, we're going to be sending him those so we can look those over and then provide some feedback to us on that. I think that just provides some coherence. And look at the narrative, then look at the attachments, look at the narrative. We'll have a complete, revisions and attachments, and then be able to give us kind of a more wholesome view of like, here's the entire application as it stands, the 1.0 version. We'll then get that back on the 2nd of August. And one possibility here, which is our preference, is that at that point in time, board members take a look at what the 1.0 version looks like and what Simeon has provided comments on, where we are with that and making some of the revisions to that. And then giving us some feedback on kind of what you see. In this case, we'd be able to we wouldn't need line item sort of editing from members of the board. That's not a good use of people's time. But if there are bigger kind of like rocks that should be moved structurally, we would want that feedback early on so we can then act on that. And so this option provides for board members, if they wish, to look at this and provide more substantive feedback on bigger items in the application itself, and then give us time to kind of incorporate that. So that would be between the 2nd and 5th. So it's a 3-day window, but we're kind of giving people a heads up, like, hey, if you want to dig into this, this is the time in which it's best to do so that we can act on that feedback. So that's sort of option 1. I'll talk about option 2 in a moment. So we'll be digging in that from the 2nd to 5th. Simeon will get that back, and then he'll begin drafting or looking at our full application, the 2.0 version, between the 5th of August and the 9th of August. He'll get that back to us. We'll review the 2.0 version and then address any of the comments or feedback he has to that 2.0 version and moving to the final version. The other option here is for the board to dig into this portion of the agenda as you get something a bit more complete and final. The issue is that timing wise, if there are big items folks want to move around or make structural changes to, the timeline wouldn't allow for that. And so in this case, it'd be more about refining and seeing something which is more polished. Stepping back, I feel like we're in pretty good form right now with the draft we have. We're building on something that was successful 5 years ago. So I'm not trying to like shake things up too much. We're just trying to make things better and more up to date and reflective of who we are as a school in the best possible way. So there are a couple of options for sort of when the board dips into this and reviews things. One would be earlier on, where you get something a bit earlier in process, not fully refined, but you're able to kind of create or offer some bigger structural changes if you feel like that's suitable. And then the other would be looking at something a bit further along where it's refined, and then knowing that like, this is almost done. We're not going to shake things up too much, but if you want to see kind of where we are and then offer some more nuanced feedback in refinement, that's fine too. In any case, we get back that more refined feedback in the end, have a couple of days to polish things out. Right now, there's a board meeting scheduled for the 15th. We would formally approve that. That's a part of the requirement for this process, and then submit the 16th. That's the timeline as of now. Let me step back. Are there clarifying questions? I know there's a lot to kind of talk about and look at.
Yeah, I don't think there's any downside in doing both, right? You could send out, and I don't see Marion on the call, but I think she would say, just get me whatever you have and we can look at it. If we have the time to look at it, we'll look at it, an earlier version. And then we can also look at the final one, especially if it's just a red line against what we did last time, which was successful. I don't see any downside in just circulating something, ASAP.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Other folks on the call, other ideas, or would you stamp that and agree with what Jim has put forth?
I think I agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah, same here. I agree with that as well.
Cool. So I think in that case, what we would do is on the evening of the 2nd, we send an email out. Hey, here's where we are right now. Here's some guidance. If you want to dive into specific areas, this would be helpful. People would then have 3 days to do that. We'd send things back to Simeon. He'd send something back to us, and then we do the same thing on the evening of the 9th. Here's where we are now. If you'd like to dip into it, this is how you can be most helpful. We feel good about these as areas. This is an area where perhaps we could use some feedback, that kind of thing. I think that would result in the strongest application at the end.
And is Simeon the consultant for the renewal, or kind of part of a lobbying effort, or?
He's our renewal consultant. So he founded a school in the Berkshires. He worked with the Charter Center. He's done site visits with our authorizer before. He's worked for them. He's worked with the other authorizer in New York State. And then, his job is to help schools in kind of writing renewal applications, and spends a lot of time doing that.
Okay, great.
Okay, so I think we've got a plan here. This is helpful in terms of where we move regarding next steps. Michelle, any clarifying questions for this team, given what's been proposed? Cool, we're good then. All right.
Actually, that's not true. I guess one question that I would have for team is how much context would be helpful to provide. If it's just kind of like, hey, here's the Google Drive forward, here's the Google Drive folder, and here's the names of each of these, and here's where it would be helpful for help. Or if you all feel like it will be helpful to have a more in-depth overview, maybe even like a 5-minute video tutorial of me walking through, like, this is when we say narrative, this is what I mean. When we talk about these attachments, this is what I mean. When I say revisions, this is what we mean, to go through kind of a more detailed breakdown of this process and what the components are. I'm happy to do that if it's helpful. If it's redundant with what we did 5 years ago, then I definitely don't need to.
I wouldn't want to create work for work's sake. So maybe we lean on you a little bit on that as you're going through it. And if you take a little feel of it, I don't know that you need to do a tutorial necessarily, but if you think it, we forgot what's in there and we need that, maybe that's the case. Maybe it's a quick call or something, but I mean, my vote is I'll leave that up to you.
I that's right. I would just bullet point out the things that we need to focus on when you send the transmittal, and then if people want to hop on a call, they can suggest that at that time. But let's not assume that there's a lot to be done here on your end, Michelle. Let's not create more work for you.
All right. Sounds good. I just wanted to offer if it's helpful, but that sounds great.
Yeah.
Terrific. So I think with that, we close out that portion of tonight's meeting and move into items for approval tonight. Just because it's July and we didn't have committee meetings last week, we're going to hold off from approving the June meeting minutes until August. So there's nothing formally to approve tonight. So we move on. I'm going to talk a bit about what's going on in August because it's a busy time. And in terms of the agenda, here's what I see showing up in about 4 weeks. So a number of approval items. We'll approve both June and July. The renewal application will come up formally for renewal, but there's going to be some dialogue between now and the 15th. So it's not as if on the 15th you haven't seen the application and are like, wait, what am I approving? You'll have an understanding of what's there. In addition to that, approval for the employee handbook revisions we make, as well as student and family handbook revisions. We've got a bus agreement, which will be ready to go for the AFC prior to the August meeting that will then come up for approval. Possible approval of annual goals and metrics if we get there. That might be a September item. I'd like to do it in August though. We'll have a report out on a number of assessments, the results, the analysis of which and the actions we're taking. That includes STAR, state exams, and AP exams. We'll close out the governance dashboard for 21-22 and open up the dashboard for 22-23. I'll offer some headlines on where we are with some of the things I mentioned earlier today as we plan forward for the summer. I'll probably hold off on post-secondary outcomes because of how heavy this agenda will be. But if we get there, I'd like to provide you with some data on where kids are from our graduating cohorts, college matriculation-wise and persistence-wise. And then finally, this is probably a September item too, if I'm being honest with where we are, but I'll put it on your radar now. Each year we do an annual sort of self-assessment at the governance level. And so we would onboard to that before then people conducting it over the course of 1 month to the next. So that's the full gamut with regard to what might go on in August, just so you have a heads up on things. Anything missing here? Probably not. Any comments or any questions about what's listed though? Cool. Okay. Chris,
Josh, the only thing I'd say is, you know, it's a big travel month or vacation month for people. And you and I have taken this offline, but I would just confirm, it sounds like there's a lot to talk about, especially I think people are going to be interested on the results, the testing results. And so I would just, before we lock down the date and time, I would make sure you get a time and a date where a lot of people can participate, because this is all very interesting stuff.
Yeah, so maybe if everyone's kind of in, we'll spend 5 minutes on that during the executive session tonight to see if we can identify a date for the folks who are here, and then we can expand it out to folks who are not present this evening. So that makes sense. Chris, did you want to say anything about the annual report and disclosure, non-disclosure, whatever the form is you need?
Absolutely. Thanks. So in addition to our renewal report that Michelle's been working hard on, we also have to submit our annual report, which is due at 11:59 p.m. on August 1st, which is next Monday. As part of that, every board member is required to complete a disclosure of financial interest form every year. It could be DocuSign, it could be electronic signature. You can print it out, sign it, and scan it back in. I emailed it to you guys earlier today. If you could get it back to me by Friday, that would be great. It will let me compile the report for Monday.
This is one of those things that you do every year that if you get it done by that deadline, you make life much easier for us. I can remember in prior years there being one board member that I love dearly, who I'd have to pester to no end in getting this in. So make our lives easier. Just get it done. If you need some help in some way, let us know. But thank you in advance for making our lives as easy as can be.
Chris, why don't you just send out a DocuSign to everybody? Can you do that?
Yes, I will do that.
That is like 2 clicks and it's done.
Yeah,
it's probably
no problem. Yep.
Yeah.
good idea. Good stuff. All right.
More work is actually valuable. Chris, given that you said the exact minute that it's due, I appreciate the urgency that's on your mind. So I'll do my
Thank you.
All right. Public comment. I think we're in virtual land tonight, so we can move things forward from public comment. Going once, going twice. All right. And then board meeting assessment. Thank you all. A July meeting, this felt good. It felt fast, but it felt productive overall. That's my kind of take on things. I appreciate people leaning in. Any other comment or feedback about how we ran things tonight that would be valuable for our next meeting?